All right, let's go and get started. I'll send it down to you, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate the introductions. We're really excited to have both Regan and Jerry here today. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. I appreciate it. I'm really excited about the topic that we have. This is a topic that has been talked about in message boards and community organizations about, what's going to happen with third-party providers and this whole CMMC and DFARS and how are these organizations going to be able to support, the DIB as we move towards CMMC. And so today what we really want to focus on is these kinds of organizations and the kinds of challenges that they're going to run into and how they can best support the DIB, long term, right? So I think the first thing that we can do is really just kind of start defining some of these terms that we're going to be talking about. So first, we have MSPs and we have what's called an MSSP. And MSPs are basically third-party organizations that do mostly day-to-day operational support for networks, computers, systems, desktops, cloud services, et cetera, right? You can think of that as your day-to-day operations, add, move, change of users, standing up a new server, those kinds of configurations. We also have MSSPs. So, Jerry or Regan, either one of you, from an MSSP standpoint, how would you define an MSSP?
Well, from my perspective, an MSSP is it's kind of a subset of the functions of an MSP, but it's really focused on the security operations, the monitoring, looking really for the attacks and being able to appropriately respond. It's a whole separate set of tools, skills, and responses. And I think that's an area of expertise that really defines what an MSP is, or MSSP is compared to the broader set of functions that you described as an MSP.
Right, and so from a name standpoint, just because we didn't define actually what the MSSP and MSP stand for, is managed services provider is an MSP, right? And then managed security services provider is an MSSP. So Jerry, I agree with you completely. We've got MSSPs. They do a lot more incident response type work. They do work once a breach has happened. They will go in, help clean the breach up many times. And then kind of on the top end, they'll do, in a lot of cases, VCISO type activities, right? Virtual Chief Information Security Officer type activities. Anything you want to add to that, Regan?
No, I mean, I think that MSPs, whether they're providing security services or day-to-day IT, I think that there's a tremendous market opportunity for them, right? And so, in addition to the services that they provide, there's also opportunities for training and education, because remember that there is substantial user education that needs to take place in really the institutionalization of the requirements throughout the organization. So MSPs really become a value add to the organization itself, really beyond the IT aspects, and really just engaging them about cybersecurity hygiene, cybersecurity insider threat, phishing attacks, and also talking about data management, right? How do we do data management virtually? And then also working with the organization to align their workflow requirements really around, or as you were, really integrate their IT architecture with the workflow requirements. So it really works hand in glove. So I think that really MSPs really come off the bench, if you will, and they really look at the organization. They've got the opportunity to look at their organization and look at their workflow and really provide a whole plethora of value-added services that they may not have had the chance to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's a great point. Many MSPs don't really do training very much, but this is something for this specific market with the awareness and training requirements, in the program. They're really going to have to step up and do some of those kinds of things because many companies don't have that capability built into their organizations to go in and do, yearly awareness training, export control information training, that kind of stuff that, sometimes if you have an FSO, you may, have your FSO do that kind of work, right? But, if you don't have an FSO and you're still dealing, with some of these things, you may need a third party to do that.
There's another aspect to this in the policies and procedures, right? So in the IT policies, most of in my private clients, that you'll see the pizza sauce spill down the middle of the access control policy, because their part-time IT person or full-time IT person did it at lunchtime, right? So now you really have the opportunity to really bring a professionalize, if you will, those compliant IT policies, and really engage the organization in making sure that there's goodness of fit, right? That the access control policy, configuration management, remote access control policy, all of those things really meet the organization's needs, and also that the infrastructure, architecture, and services that the MSP is providing really align to those requirements.
Yeah, that's really good. And then, that's without even getting into all of the maturity level processes, right? That we have to deal with. So, given all of that kind of information, how do you guys see, and this is really for either one of you, how do you see the MSP and the MSSP really integrating in with an organization and being able to help deliver these capabilities? I mean, how deep is this integration going to be between the third-party providers, the MSPs and MSSPs, and the OSCs, the organizations seeking certification, the DIB members, right? How deep is that integration going to have to be?
Yeah, I mean, we work for some of the DIBs that are only 2 people in size. Obviously, they don't have the skill sets, the knowledge, or the interest in doing that particular function that they have to demonstrate to continue to get their the defense contract. So in that case, they want an easy button. Right? They just want to say, hey, I just want that whole thing outsourced. So when it comes to the MSP and the MSSP, I think there's a nice separation of duties between what the MSP is doing around day-to-day operations, and then the MSSP really monitoring that operations as well as the threats coming externally, to really be kind of a single authority that works with multiple suppliers for that business. So we like to recommend that you have a separate MSP and MSSP organizations, just because of that separation of duty, and they complement themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the guardians at the gate, one of the major challenges that we face for a very long time in sort of IT culture, is that your CISO and CIO really, there is a conflict of interest, right? Your CIO is really driving the organization and trying to meet requirements, while your CISO is trying to defend the organization, oftentimes from itself, right? So I think that one of my recommendations from one of my clients that was in MSP, and I really recommend it to the ecosystem at large, is that if you specialize, if you've got a great relationship with your customer, don't try to be all things. Search for a security provider that and partner with them and say, look, we want to outsource. We don't want to duplicate, because defending an organization is very expensive. Specialized expertise, it's high demand, low density. And so now you've got the opportunity to partner with organizations and say, look, we've got a great relationship with our organization. We want to do everything that you don't want to do, and we need you to defend our clients and our customers, and let them specialize in what they do do best. So we've in my experience, we've been able to partner MSSPs with MSPs who are willing to white label, willing to partner and engage one another, so that you do have this separation of duties, right? But yet there is interdependence and cooperation in order to make sure that the needs are met ultimately from the customer. I think that ultimately, I would agree with Jerry 100% that these requirements are so specialized that it's very, very difficult for your average company to even figure it out. One time I spent, 2.5 hours with a 28-year network architect of $1 billion multinational company, explaining to him what the requirements were, right? That was a sort of a revelation for me that these requirements are complicated, and they are not intuitive even to folks who are highly specialized in this area. So I do think that there's an opportunity for the customers to engage their MSPs and say, look, we need help, because that's absolutely imperative. We need help with these things, and then to sort of bundle the services, and then don't be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Reach out to partner organizations and in a collaborative fashion, and provide in order to provide a full package of goods and services, compliant goods and services to your customers.
Yeah, that's great. So some of the things that you mentioned in there kind of brings up a a balance, a risk reward balance, right? Of, what do I outsource? Do I keep some of this in house? Do I go to multiple providers, like you were saying? I think that the triangle idea is a great idea. MSP, MSSP, and customer. They each kind of watch each other and keep everybody honest, right? That's a great model. But what are some of the risks and rewards of outsourcing any of this capability altogether? I mean, you have some companies that we work with. Some of them, when you get into the 500 to 1,000 employee and up range, they want to build their own capabilities in-house, right? They want to kind of do it all themselves. They want to build that infrastructure in-house, and they're shocked by the amount of expertise that they have to get on hand to do these things, right? But they still want to try and do it themselves, and that's great. Company of that size, you probably do need to start building your own capability. But for the under 100 employee market, the 200 employee market, they are not going to be able to hire enough IT people in most cases to do all of these capabilities. So what are some of those trade-offs that you give when you go to a third-party provider? In your perspective.
Well, I think that in my experience, the third-party providers so the customer's looking at cost-benefit analysis, right? And so they're saying, okay, look, I want to hire, I've got to hire 4 more people in order to cover all of these requirements. Or I have to add additional duties and I have to spread my guys or my IT folks even more thinly than they are. So you've got help desk tickets, you've got all of the things that you need to do, which the IT folks tend to be overtasked and undermanned to begin with, right? Because IT folks are highly specialized, they're highly skilled, and they're very expensive. So in my humble opinion, I think that the future, it really is cloud services. I think that there is a risk and that you are outsourcing expertise, but you have to really think about what level of expertise can you really capture at the budget that you have, and can you retain them, right? And so, at the end of the day, is the expertise real? Because in the cybersecurity world, you have to complement human expertise with lots and lots of tech. And that tech requires man hours, implementation, oversight, and really the due diligence of your team to be able to really execute the full functions of those technologies and capabilities. So in my experience, I've seen that they'll buy lots of equipment, and you've got lots of flashing lights and buzzings and lots of pretty monitors. But at the end of the day, how much is really useful to defending the organization? It's only a function of how much time that the folks who are doing the security services have time to actually execute and really oversee. So in my humble opinion, I think that the future is certainly cloud services, but more importantly, it's outsourcing those specialized skills that you cannot afford. You can't afford to defend your organization, right? You can't afford the expertise that's required to do that, and because the threats are becoming more and more sophisticated. So those investments are much better spent partnering with an organization that you can build trust and confidence in, and an enduring relationship over a given period of time.
Yeah, Jerry, we've seen this when we're trying to hire staff for our team, right? The market is extremely, extremely tight right now. There is just not a lot of talent available on the market for us to go hire. It's very difficult. Have you seen kind of the same thing, in the areas that you're hiring in, for being able to hire and retain talent?
Right. Finding folks that understand security from a business standpoint are very difficult to find, let alone just practitioners that are managing and monitoring and, the operational sort of things. There's just a lack of skilled expertise to help drive within an organization at the top level down, as well as staffing just to handle the scale. So we absolutely seen that. And what's interesting, and adding on to Regan's, for companies less than 100, there was a SANS Institute I was just reading today. On average, they have 1 to 1.5 IT people, and that IT person handles all the desktop and all the cybersecurity, right? And most of these folks don't have the skill sets. Right. So you have a choice, right? If you want to stay in the business with the DoD or any federal agency that puts these requirements on, you have to invest on premise. That's I'll build it myself. And we all know how long it takes to build infrastructure, find people, and the cost of those people. Right. If that's not well orchestrated or understood, you can spend a ton of money and never get to a point, right? But this is where the MSP comes into play. They've already have built the operational excellence. They've got the skilled people. They've got the tools and the templates. Going back to the automation, no individual can manually monitor all the SIM logs. You've got to come in and start processing those with automation and look for the exceptions with the rules to quickly respond and extract the issues. That's not going to happen for any company under 100 people effectively and cost effectively. So the MSP has got the skill sets, it's got the automation, and it really helps lower the costs for them to get the level of expertise they need to be able to perform at the DoD requirements to deliver what they do best, which is their product or service. So that's a big benefit for the MSP in terms of cost effectiveness. And you mentioned that for bigger companies, they've got 5 IT. They like to do some of the work themselves, but there's a lot of work they don't like to do. So maybe they outsource that and they move more from an engineering to more of a design, change management function, which is really higher value for the organization and those people. And it's always been the IT issue with outsourcing. Those companies need to find the right distribution between those guys to really optimize the expertise of the on-site IT people, providing that to the MSP, and the MSP providing the right services that optimize for the OSC or the supplier. And with that 1 + 1 = 3 combination, you really get more value both as an MSP and as a supplier to meet these regulations.
Yeah, I think and just to add to that, one of the major challenges in just culture is that if I build it on site, it's more secure. I know where it's at. I'm better at it than they are, right? And also, the human side of budgets and people, I'd like to add one more person to my team to make things easier. I think that it really is a false argument, because ultimately at the end of the day, what you really want is an IT team that's lean, mean, and capable, and then has great relationships and be able to identify what they really can do and can do well, service the organization, keep it up and functioning, help us to get, keep the, if you have operational technologies, helping those, stay in line, producing products and services, helping that superstructure and that infrastructure really support the company to do what it does best. And I think at the end of the day, you cannot do everything. Yeah. So the question is if I can't do everything, what can I do that really is valuable and internal to the organization? And really, whom do I choose to be on the team that I trust to deliver the products and services that I need outside my organization?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the things that you mentioned brings up a point that I think is probably important to bring up: relationships. Right. The relationship between a DIB member and their third-party providers, or MSPs, MSSPs, that relationship is really, really important.
Yes.
When you're looking for an MSP, you've got to find a provider who you can work with on a day-to-day basis. You are essentially married you have a union. You're married, right? You're working with each other literally every day, and usually the times that you're working most intensely together are not good times. Right. There's some kind of crisis, there's something gone wrong, and you have to have that kind of working relationship. And if you don't develop that relationship, it's not going to go well, right? And so it's really important that as you are looking for those MSPs, that you look for someone you can have a long-term relationship with. So that's just something that to tie off of that.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned about risk. In terms of when we're supplying options for our customers on kind of the easy button of MSPs, MSSPs, documentation, training, I just need it all. Every MSP, every MSSP has different capabilities and strengths, so it's not a one-size-fits-all.
That's absolutely right.
So when you go and look at your MSP, there are certain questions you're going to want to ask yourself, like, do you have any defense industrial-based customers and have already implemented environments around NIST 871 or DFARS? Because if they haven't, there is so much underlying understanding of that it would raise a red flag for me. The second one is if they're not willing to take any DFARS flow downs into their contracts, basically meaning that you're doing shared accountability with them, then you don't want them, because as part of your audits that you'll go through, they have to sit next to you at the audit table because they're representing half your business of managing the CUI and the data through their operational. So they have to be there side by side with the business to demonstrate compliance.
Yeah.
And
If I could add to that, you mind? So one of the powerful things about what Jerry said is yes, of course, the DFARS 7012 in paragraph M requires the terms and conditions to be flow down word for word. But what we're really talking about is trust, right? Because if I have a relationship and I have expertise, what I really need is trust, because that is the bridge that builds those two together. Because ultimately, I am trusting as an OSC that my MSP or my MSP and my MSSP are going to deliver the products and services that I need to be compliant, because my contract is at stake, right? So if on game day you show up and you really don't know what you're doing, or part and parcel to my audit, you're like, well, and all of a sudden things start falling apart, I'm at risk, right? So the most important thing here is that the trust in both the experience and the expertise, and the trust in the relationship, because these are interdependencies that cannot fail. People's mortgages, their lives, their car payments, their businesses that they've spent their lives building are at risk, right? And that's a good thing, because that makes those that creates opportunity for us to deliver better products and services that focus value on what we do best. But if I had to juxtapose value and trust, I would trust every time.
sure.
Yeah.
So what you guys are bringing up, just led directly into my next question. So, this is kind of the pressing question that a lot of people are asking. Do MSPs and MSSPs have to get CMMC certified to be able to service the DIB? That's kind of the core, that's the crux of the issue, right? Is, we've got MSPs that have been out there doing business for 10, 20 years, right? They might have one DIB customer.
Right.
Maybe. Do they have to get CMMC certified to continue to service that DIB customer if they've got access to their systems and they're managing their environment?
Yeah. Okay. So there are. I'm gonna answer the question. I'm gonna answer it indirectly though. Right now, the existing requirement underneath FAR 52.204.21 and DFARS 252.204.7012 requires that those terms and conditions be flowed down to them as the subcontractor, because they're handling that data, right?
Right.
Word for word. So that's the requirement right now. So if you do not have a relationship with your current MSP, they will either allow you to do that, or that you haven't done that, then that's the time. This is the wake-up call right now. So let's don't even look forward into CMMC, because the answer is yes and yes, right? So we need to look at the way that we're managing our data and how that data is accessed, transmitted, secured, and created, of course, and stored. So if any of those involve a third party, MSP, MSSP, then the answer is absolutely yes. They should be DFARS compliant right now. That's a requirement. If you're only handling data that involves a federal contract, then you could be compliant with the first 15 requirements of the basic security.
Essentially, you're talking about FCI versus CUI.
That's correct. Yeah. So, but most people don't know about FCI yet, but they will, because that freight train's coming. But the most important thing though is if you have a federal contract, and this is we're going to talk about the interim rule, but in the interim rule it says that every single organization, period, that has a DoD contract will have to be at least CMC level 1 certified. So if you have only federal contract information, and if you don't know what that definition is, then it's I'm stomping my foot in Army terms, because that's really important. You need to understand what that definition is and understand if you have it in terms of your federal contract right now and for DoD. That will be required to be CMC level 1 certified, and all the third parties that support you in accessing, transmitting, securing, storing that data, and creating, if you have a subcontractors that are supporting your effort, all of those things will be required to be flow down and required to be are required to be compliant right now under FAR 52.204. When we get to in terms of CMMC, that the exact same requirements will translate over to a level 1 organization. For a level 3 organization, which the key, as you know, is controlled and classified information, you are required right now underneath DFARS 7012 for your third parties who are assisting, accessing, securing, storing, helping you create that data as subcontractors to party to the contract, or transmitting that data. All of those organizations which are supporting you must be certified. Now, we expect for them to be exceptions, right? Let me give you an exception. So I'm an air conditioning repair person, and I'm working at Jerry's factory. And I've been supporting him for years. He's got a factory floor. He makes tanks, and so I will be accessing CUI because I'm working on Jerry's air conditioning on his factory floor. Now, does that require me to be CMC Level 3 certified? The answer is no. And the reason for that is because what Jerry has the opportunity to do is encompass me in his policies and procedures. Now, before I have access to Jerry's environment, I need to understand my responsibilities and my safeguarding responsibilities and the requirements of being in an environment that has CUI. Can I be in that environment at all? Well, yes, because I have a lawful government purpose. I'm supporting Jerry, who's supporting the contract, right? So it's important that for his employees' safety and comfort that they have air conditioning functioning. So I've met the requirements in terms of a lawful government purpose to access Jerry's environment, but I need to understand that the information that I'm accessing while I'm in his environment, that I'm restricted from that. I may have a reason to be in the environment, but I've got no reason to actually access that information. So when we look at terms of the opportunity for everyone to be CMC level certified, the answer is no. It would not make sense for Jerry to pass that down to the terms and conditions, but he may pass down the terms and conditions to me, though that I have to go through training. I have to meet his access policy and his IT policies. Physical security policy, right? Mm-hmm. And all of those requirements associated with accessing that environment. Or let's say I'm an MSSP and I'm only accessing to help secure, or an MSP, secure would be different, but I'm an MSP that's accessing for, let's say, to do remote desktop. And I've got to access your data on your desktop. Now, I'm not retaining that data. I'm just accessing it remotely to help you, get your stuff done on your computer. So do I need to be CMC level 3? No, the answer is no, not unless I'm retaining that data.
So just to put a little bit of a finer point
Sure.
on that, if an MSP, because my next question was, is there any situation where an MSP or an MSSP would not need to be CMMC certified? And so I think the answer to that, or the way you're explaining it, is if the entire infrastructure that is being used to manage your environment is internal to your organization, and the MSP is only remoting in and accessing that implementation to manage your infrastructure, essentially just providing nothing but labor, right? Then that's okay.
Yeah.
But if a MSP has their own infrastructure that is managing the endpoint devices, is pushing patches out, which is what 99% of MSPs do, right? Then they're going to have to be certified, because they're going to potentially have that, FCI and CUI information in their logs, on their machines.
Yeah. So that distinction is critical. The access only person for the air conditioning vendor, that's one example, right? I'm a third party, I'm accessing only access to help support the environment. Mm-hmm. The other piece on the MSP is really distinctive between the fact that I'm not retaining that data. I'm only accessing it to provide third-party services for whatever that reason is, and that data is basically left behind. However, what we would do is we would write an operations and maintenance policy which says, look, when a third-party provider comes in and into my environment, whether they're accessing remotely through remote access control policy, or an operations and maintenance physically there, right? Then they have to meet these types of requirements. Right. However, if they retain the data or they're securing the data, so it's different when they're a party to actually, defending the data, right? Mm-hmm. Then, because it makes sense, if I'm defending the data, I should be knowledgeable about all the requirements, right? So the idea there is that it's very distinctive, and it needs to be distinctive in your policies. and in your procedures, because, you know, differentiating that, if I'm a 1099 consultant and I'm working on site, do I need to be CMC level 3 certified? No, probably not. Right. But I do need to meet all the terms and conditions and requirements associated with operating in that environment.
Just as an employee would.
That's correct. I mean, there's something in 32 CFR 2016 or 2002-16 that has a reasonable expectation rule. And that means that in order for Jerry to come work in my environment or for us to share CUI, I have to have the reasonable expectation that he's been trained and knowledgeable about the responsibilities associated with handling or accessing CUI. Right. But if we are in a contractual agreement, I have to either provide that training myself, or then I have to ensure that I have a reasonable expectation that he has that training. And if in this instance, if Jerry were retaining the data, then I would have a reasonable expectation that he is actually compliant with NIST 800-171 or CMC certified.
Yeah, and so with this type of situation, you know, the vast majority of MSPs do not run, you know, the 1099 route, right? Mm-hmm. They have centralized systems that are managing, you know, tens or hundreds of customers at a time with a single consolidated infrastructure. Right. And so if they didn't have that, then they would essentially have to set up each one of these systems. Each one of these patching systems would have to be inside each individual customer's environment, and that's not really feasible. That's really not feasible, right? Yeah. For most organizations. So
a careful distinction there, though, is that let's say I'm an MSP and I have commercial and sort of DoD customers, right? I mean, you've run into this before, Jerry. I'm sure. So, you know, that idea about this segmentation, because now I have to make a business decision, right? Which is, okay, I've got co-mingled environments. Now I'm going to have to tease out how I'm going to handle, you know, the DoD customers and then the commercial customers. Am I going to treat them separately or distinctly? You know, am I going to, you know, make sure my entire system meets requirements, right? How did you handle that, Jared?
Well, I mean, it really comes back to this is all about the data.
Right.
Right. Commercial or defense, if you use data in a system that's used by both, how do you know the difference? That's the biggest problem for most of the larger organizations that have consolidated their business on a single infrastructure. But the DoD says, no, you can't do that. And a lot of times, many of the bigger customers have foreign nationals, and they obviously can't access it. Right. So, you know, for example, we've worked with Microsoft, and Microsoft's got some great cloud solutions, but they've asked us to go in and help customers figure out their data governance and how to manage the data up front so they can actually understand their business processes prior to implementing a tool. Right. Because just implementing a tool doesn't solve the problem, and that's a big problem that most folks think. The compliance officers will tell the IT guys, you can't do that, even though it's easy to stand up and it's done. The compliance officer said that doesn't meet the requirements, we're going to fail and we'll lose our contract. So they have to step back. But really about the data is wherever the data flows is the boundary, as they call it, CUI boundary that and every organization needs to understand. And that's not just digital, but that's physical as well. So from sales to shipping, that whole engineering, it's the oil that runs your business. And it also goes across the people, the processes, and the technology. So it's very invasive, it's very broad. So if you looked at PCI, HIPAA, SOX, which are focused on data types, this potentially could be 10 times as big because it's so invasive to the defense industrial base. And speaking about, you know, the supply chain, so what are our supply chains? An MSP is considered a supplier. They're part of the supply chain. They're within the boundary of the CUI. Right. Just like your painting vendors, just like other folks that have to receive data and store it and manage it. And with MSPs, one of the challenges we've seen is in the commercial space, they have a lot of tools they use to better manage forensics, look at logs. But as you bring that into the defense space, those tools may not be, quote, a FedRAMP certified or approved for access. So now you've got MSPs that might be doing NIST 171, but they're using tools that aren't certified to protect the data. So there are weak points that even MSPs don't understand. So it's really important to make sure you have an MSP that understands that the data is the most important thing, and that every tool, every process protects the data within the boundary. So that
one of the things that you mentioned when you talk about data management and the types of data that we're dealing with, this is all unclassified data, right? We're all talking about unclassified. We're not getting any classified stuff here. But within the unclassified world, you have export control data.
Right.
You have no foreign data,
Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Yep.
And so if you as an organization have, export control data or no foreign data, what do you think about making sure that, you're looking for an MSP that basically has all U.S. persons?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, let me speak to that a bit. So I think that, the most important thing for an organization to make great choices about what infrastructure they're going to invest in or outsource, right, products and services, is that they understand the types of data that they have. And this is really the convergence, if you will, between your export control compliance regime and then CUI. Because some folks may or may not understand out there that CUI, export control, is a category of CUI underneath the DoD contract on the CUI registry. And the reality is that some of the basic security requirements serve the same, but when we get into the specified requirements, they're unique attributes, right? U.S. persons only. So all of a sudden now I'm using Oracle or SAP or some other application that I've got this embedded CUI in. And then now, do I know that U.S. persons, U.S. persons are accessing this data? Now, you could say, well, that's always been a requirement for export control. Yes, that's true. However, you've got third-party assessors showing up, and they're going to take a look at that because if you look at media protection, we just talked about it today, training the provisional assessors today with the AB. 3.122 says that you're going to mark CUI according to the appropriate policy. So what is the appropriate policy according to DoD 5248 for export control? It's the export control compliance requirements. So assessor's going to take a look at that and go, okay, they have export control data because they're going to find that out, and they're going to go, okay, well, who's accessing that data? Are you violating the safeguarding requirements associated with the data? So I think that when you're looking at an MSP or looking at any third-party services, you're going to have to make a careful distinction about whom it is you are choosing. Because now there is going to be somebody to show up. It's not sort of DDTC or State Department roulette on whether or not somebody's going to actually check. Now that check is coming, right?
Yeah,
that check is coming like a freight train. And with 100% conformity, 100% conformity on 130 controls, that standard is very tough in a large organization, right? One non-conformance and it's over. Right? That's a very expensive opportunity to either succeed or fail. And there's a lot at risk, right? The contract. So especially with the interim rule saying that, you need to be certified prior to or at the time of award. So that reality is there's a very, very high stakes game here. But being knowledgeable about that CUI and where that CUI goes, and FCI, of course, it follows the data.
So, I think we've pretty well established that MSPs, MSSPs, they're going to have to get CMMC certified.
That's right.
The vast, vast majority of cases, right? So given that these MSPs and MSSPs are supporting these DIB infrastructures, and the DIB companies have to get themselves certified,
right?
The last thing that you want to have as an MSP be that the DIB company goes and gets themselves certified, and then you're their MSP, and now they aren't eligible for an award because you as their provider are not certified yet. So the timeline for MSPs and MSSPs to get certified, they really need to be at the front of the line just about because, they as one organization, if they're supporting 20 DIB customers, that one organization not being certified could essentially knock out 20 other certified companies from being able to get an award.
That's right. Not only that, but think about the legal liability associated with you become the weakest link, right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean that. To be honest with you, the MSP should be leading.
Yeah,
should be leading the standard, right?
Yeah.
And because ultimately it is in their business interest to the business opportunity, but also at the business risk, right? You don't want your customer, whom you've got great relationships with, to lose because you have one nonconformity. And you're not certified, or when you're I'm not sure what they're going to end up naming them, but you're basically CMMC auditor support shows up at the audit either virtually or physically, and then doesn't know the answers to the questions. And then now the auditor says, okay, or the assessor says, okay, we need to dive in a little deep here. Does this organization really know what they're doing, right? So at certain, there is going to be a chicken and egg problem, and we're facing that within the AB of trying to really focus in on how to really address this in that, okay, MSPs are going to need to be certified. Okay, well, what's the standard that they have to meet now? Well, DFARS 7012. Well, so DFARS 7012 is going to remain intact underneath the interim rule. So now we need to make sure that they're compliant, but if they haven't yet been certified, then they're going to have to participate. And at some point in time, there's an exercise where the assessor turns to the MSP and starts asking the hard questions. Right. And if the answers aren't there, then there's no doubt that the assessor is going to have to dig a little bit deeper and look for the evidence and examine exactly what is the evidence for your conformity. So it is a land of opportunity, I believe, for those serious MSPs out there, and it is a high risk game if you are not serious.
I'd love to add to that. I mean, one of the stories and all of the CEOs I've been talking to, primarily the small and even the $8 billion companies, is that this is coming. They're raising the bar. Early adopters will have a competitive opportunity.
I agree with that.
And I've got an $8 billion VP of IT that says, I get it. I've got the investment. Let's go. And they just finished their NIST 800-171 and have 0 POEMs.
That's awesome.
An $8 billion company.
That's amazing.
You don't tell me they're in a position when they come, hey, we want to go build a naval ship. Oh yeah, we're ready. We'll put all the metal in for you, right?
That's right.
But even down to people of 5 or 10, I'm talking to CEO owners. They go, yeah, I see that. I really want to just protect my own information, right? Because if I lost that information, my business would be gone. My competitors would suck it up. So just that own piece is important. Let alone one of my customers like the DoD. So what I've been telling them is that early adopters are going to get a competitive advantage.
I agree with
so
that.
when your primes come to you, hey, we got this contract, needs CMMC level 3 supplier. Are you there? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you're in. But if you're saying, no, we're still waiting for the rule, we're still trying to figure it out, we're thinking about it. Oh, you're too risky now. I can't afford you to be part of my team where everybody has to be at least a certain level of CMC. You're out.
Totally.
So if you've got it, you're in and you have a competitive advantage. Same for MSPs.
Yep.
So if you have an MSP that has that, you're going to be the front runner for all the dibs looking for that MSP.
Absolutely.
For those customers that you have and you're not, you're going to lose those customers.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I actually have one of my customers who basically talked to the buyer, right, and said, look, it came up in the conversation, and I said, look, we're not compliant like all the check-the-box firms out there. We're actually best practices. And they got the award based on that. Right. He said, look, we are struggling to find compliant suppliers out there. And the fact that you said best practices, all I've heard is hem and haws from the other folks that I was talking to, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so because you said best practices, this is a done deal. And so I think that, those MSPs out there who, if I were an MSP, what I would be doing is I would be looking through my customer roll and going, hey, we are compliant, or we're on our way. If you're working the NIST 800 piece and working on your POEM, we're compliant and we want to help you. We know that you're under the gun, and we want to help you to become compliant. And here's what we can offer you, right? Or just assistance, just education. Look, if you have any questions as your IT guys are working through this, call us and just let us know.
Yeah, great advisory.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's a win-win. It's a win-win because the MSP, if their head is in the game, they know that if their customers are not compliant, they're going to lose their contracts. And what happens when the customer loses its contract?
Cuts the service.
It cuts its service, right? So at the end of the day, it really is a win-win. Yeah. And to wait, I think, is perilous. The interim rule in 60 days is going to go into effect. Mm-hmm. 60 days. 60 days.
It's not very long.
It's not very long.
And you get done in 60 days, right?
Yeah, you're not getting done in 60 days.
No.
You brought up a really interesting word in one of your previous answers that we haven't been able to get back around to yet, but you said liability.
Right.
Okay. MSPs have access to a lot of information, and MSPs are a target. Right. Chinese hacker groups, Russian hacker groups, they are targeting MSPs because if they can compromise an MSP, they may be able to use that to step into multiple customers, right? And so, what is your opinion on things like cyber liability insurance? Is that something that you see as a requirement for an MSP to be able to, not a requirement from a CMMC standpoint, but just a requirement from an operational standpoint? If I'm bringing you in as an MSP and you're going to have access to my information, do we need to make sure that these MSPs have that cyber liability insurance up to some level because they are going to be targeted?
Yeah, I think that the challenge of the cyber insurance industry is really understanding the risk, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about NIST 800-171 and we talk about the due diligence required to execute and really the opportunity really with cyber insurance is that a third party is validating the fact that this organization is compliant, right? And with the legal obligation as well to sustain that compliance. So I think that the judgment of risk from the insurance perspective is going down considerably. Mm-hmm. I also think that the cyber insurance trap, which has happened to many organizations, I take out an insurance policy, all of a sudden something bad happens, of course, right? Because we're all going to get breached eventually. And then I try to cash in on the policy, right? Mm-hmm. And then guess what? Oh,
part wasn't covered.
That's right. Something wasn't covered, or there was some part of the policy for which I either didn't meet the requirements, and guess what? Policy is negated, or the payout is significantly less than what I was expecting.
Right.
So for me, I think that there is an opportunity. It is a prudent measure for a company to try to manage their risk appropriately with cyber insurance. However, I think that they need to choose wisely whom their carriers and providers for that insurance, and I think that there's an opportunity for negotiation there, which is, many of my peers out there are taking cyber insurance policies. They are not required to meet these stringent requirements, and yet the risk is distributed the same, and it is not, as we would know. Everyone will get breached eventually, but at the same time, though, we have a very robust regime that requires me to be, compliant and certified. Mm-hmm. And so, how about giving me a break on my policy, right?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Is you've got companies, not just MSPs, but any company that was not built to an NIST 800-171 standard, obviously not built to a CMMC standard. They're going to get an insurance policy. Their configuration is probably going to be high cost, right? Yep. But if you go through this process of getting CMMC certified, there is a likelihood that you may be able to show that to an insurance agent or an insurance company at some point in the future, and they say, oh, well, you've been certified at CMMC level 3 or CMMC level 4, whatever it is, right. And you're going to be able to get a lot more insurance for the same amount of money if you need it, right? Yep. So that's a great thing, I think, from
think about it like this. In my CMMC requirement, NIST 800 requirement, I've got to do incident response, right? I got to have a policy, I got to have a procedure. Mm-hmm. It's got to be tested and validated, right? Those are the hallmarks of a really professional organization, mm-hmm. and that takes the cyber hygiene seriously. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is an opportunity. Have you seen that before, Jerry?
Absolutely, and I know some. Actually, very interesting software companies that go in and assess an environment to come up with a cyber risk. And then based on that, they're using actuarial tables where hacks are happening to come up with really what the probability of a breach of, a small one where somebody whacks a website versus coming in deep. And so each of those have different impacts. Right. So there are certain types of risks that you can just transfer that risk to cyber insurance. Mm-hmm. The day-to-day kind of operational stuff where you just can't keep up, mm-hmm. whack-a-mole, that just takes care of it happens. But there are other higher impact things that you either have to invest in, and there are some risks like, my data center is going to get attacked by a foreign national, they're going to break in. Very low risk of happening, the impact's high, you don't have to worry about those risks, you'll take that chance. Right. So that whole spectrum of types of risks have to be assessed from the overall risk impact. But I see a lot of folks buying cyber insurance to reduce their overall risk, and the more intelligence you can have about their cyber posture, they get better rates, mm-hmm. and because they're a lower risk provider. Same way a prime's going to select a sub, right? If you're level 3, you're a low-risk provider. I'll even pay more for that. I'm going to go and bring you in. If you aren't demonstrating your cyber posture to the level that I need, you're too risky.
Right.
Same with DoD. They're looking at, the whole supply chain is about trust. You talk about trust with the DoD. They're looking for trusted suppliers that are going to protect the CUI of this country.
That's right.
That's why they're implementing this, so they know who those people are.
That's right.
So they can select contracts and keep the data safe and, deliver what the country needs.
Yeah,
It's all what it's about.
Yeah, I to just add on what Jerry said, I like to remind people that there are companies that are being breached right this very second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and this is CMMC and certainly NIST 800-171 and DFARS 7012 is not compliance for compliance sake. There is a real, it's not hyperbole, it's not exaggeration, it's not fear-mongering. There's a real and clear and present danger in the national security interest and the future of our children and our grandchildren are literally at risk right now. And until we do something about it, this is a great opportunity. And it is a dramatic and a difficult transformation for many small, mid-sized businesses, right? I mean, it is an evolution that's been happening quickly, in our personal lives, breaches on credit cards and passwords and those sort of things. And now we're really translating that reality into our businesses. But it is a revolution in the way that we really manage our businesses day to day and the way that we manage our data. So but it's really important that people remember that adversaries are trying to ruin us. They're trying to destroy our country, steal our IP, undermine our warfighting capabilities, and really it's an endangerment to our very future. So, yes, it's compliance, and yes, there are rules and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, it is exactly what you said, Jerry. It's really about protecting that data. And just today, I'm teaching our provisional assessors, the second class. There are 3 basic golden rules, and they really boil down to a simple principle. That a person is compliant if they're safeguarding and protecting the data that they've been entrusted with. That's it. So if whatever the practice or the control or the activity, if I'm not safeguarding and handling that data appropriately, that confidentiality is maintained, then we're all at risk. So, I think that's an important distinction from just compliance for compliance sake.
Yeah,
That's very well said.
Just
Very
to
well
add to that, I mean, nation states are obviously a big threat for our lives and our children's. But I'm just looking at the global criminals out there. I've seen so many ransomware attacks recently where they've come in to a supplier, they've taken the data out, they've locked it, they've gotten money, but then they still publish it or sell it to different country. So now they got 2 customers they're making money on.
That's right.
So, and that's a day-to-day operational thing. Those folks are just about making money, not about military advantage. So you've got both of those things. And an interesting stat in some of their presentation is that today there's lots of numbers that are told about how much exfiltration happens, but in the billions and billions of dollars is exfiltrated globally. That exfiltration through cyber criminals and nation states is actually more now than the physical drug trade, which actually move drug trades across borders, and that's a physical thing, right? So it's a lot more risky to move a product, right, versus going in through cybersecurity. So it's like, okay, which is the least risk? Well, gosh, cybersecurity or cyber attacks are a lot less risky because they don't know where I'm at. I don't get my people caught with the hard drugs.
Right.
And with quantum computing and 5G, the ability to get in and out is going to be faster. So what it tells me is the trend is for more cyber attacks, both on the nation states and criminals, versus our historical and traditional physical drug trades or other sorts of trades. So it's a real problem. It doesn't slow down in the cyberspace. So in the modern workplace, people have to protect themselves.
Right.
And this is a great way to do that, just on your own IP, let alone the national IP.
That's right.
That we're all paying for, you and I. So it's something that if you want to stay in business in the modern workplace or the future, you have to invest.
Yeah.
So that's...
So those are all great comments. I do want to pivot a little bit back toward the MSP, MSSP conversation and talk about when we're outsourcing capabilities. Are there any capabilities within CMMC that you see as inherently must be done by the OSC? For example, risk management, change management. Are there some of those capabilities that you feel like this has to be run by the OSC and cannot be outsourced to an MSP or an MSSP?
Well, one of the things that I was an advocate very early on, GDPR is a very punitive regime, right? And extreme high risk. But one of the things that I really like about it is that they have the data protection officer, right? And it allows the data protection officer to be 1099 out, partial time, because you can get a lot of expertise for a very short period of time. In that concept, you have the data protection officer really protecting the data and really not compromise whether or not you're the CISO securing the data or the CIO, driving the infrastructure. And I really love that model. And I think it's overall of the things that GDPR brought to the table, that's probably the best. I think from a metaphorical standpoint on applying that in a general principle to a small mid-sized business, I think that ultimately you can't outsource protecting the data as a concept. I'm a quality manager. I'm the IT ITAR compliance person. And you can't outsource. You can outsource the service, but you can't outsource the mission.
Responsibility.
Right.
Responsibility.
That's right.
The responsibility has to stay with the organization.
That's right. And I may use you because you have the expertise that I need. But at the end of the day, it is not your responsibility to protect the data. It is mine.
It's the CEO's level.
That's right.
That's who the DoD will come talk to.
That's right. And so I think there are an inherent sense of accountability, responsibility, and authority that are inherent to the organization, and that has to be ingrained in the culture. But when you talk about useful services and specialized expertise, I think that there is value, but there isn't value unless that cultural aspect of accountability, responsibility, and authority is embedded within that organization and really transferred appropriately to that third party, which is, I'm going to give you the authority and for accountability, but I'm going to take responsibility to make sure that you succeed within my organization, right? So I think that there in practical terms, there are functions that you can certainly outsource. But internally, I think that because this is going to become more and more specialized, right? We're at the beginning of an entirely new compliance regime. And I just said today in the provisional class, there will be a fist fight over, I can't remember, controlled environment, I think was, there'll be a fist fight over a board table about what that word means 5 years from now. Because, people will be arguing back and forth because there will be so much at stake. And so I think that if those organizations that are leaning forward, that see this really as an opportunity and really the future, we're not turning back, we're never going back. I think that, there's a practical value to insourcing the concepts and really outsourcing some of those services that you really that you're not going to be able to cover your ground on the expertise.
So specifically with that, thinking about the audit process, the assessment process, you're teaching an assessor class right now.
Right.
Let's say a company, 50 employees, they're getting a level 3 assessment done.
Right.
They have outsourced their MSP, their MSSP to some other third party. They're not going to be able to answer the questions that the assessor has without that MSP or the MSSP,
right.
Being there.
Right.
So do you foresee the need to have the MSP, a representative from the MSP, a representative from the MSSP there for the entire audit process? Is that something that an OSC should plan for? Because that's a real cost that they have to plan for, right?
Yeah.
Or is there a way, that the assessors can, limit the time that they need access to those MSPs or MSSPs? How do you foresee that playing out?
Well, I think that so there's nothing written down yet, right? I mean, this is about as highly volatile as can be. But what I think if we think in practical terms of being pragmatic, so I think that there's responsibility for the assessor to recognize the fact that there's no unlimited cash flow, right? And so they want to be efficient on their time. Remember, at the end of the day, for the very first year or so, there's going to be more demand than there are assessors, right? So the efficiency of that relationship between the assessor and the OSC and those third parties that are supporting that is going to be paramount. So if an assessor walks in, they want the answers and they want them as efficiently and as quickly as possible, as thoroughly, right? Because we want to make sure that you're meeting the standard. But so the idea of sort of spending days sort of figuring it out is very expensive and very costly. Not only that, but with a 100% conforming standard, you could easily get deep into this and realize that you're going to fail, right? And then now you've got to do this again. Yeah. So I think that when we talk about sort of insourcing on the culture has to realize that we are accountable and we are responsible, and we can delegate responsibilities and authorities, but our accountability, but we need to be responsible. So I think that ultimately, they need to be a master of their domain. So they need to have that. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be streamlined. They need to understand what it is that their third parties are actually providing them, and I think that there has to be coherent documentation. So if you're my CSP, then I've asked you, can I have that third-party documentation so that I can add that to my system security plan, so that augments and add their certainty about what you said that you're doing. I've got documentation that says that you're doing that, right? And then that way, there's one belly button that basically can direct traffic during the assessment, and that person, is guiding, says, now's the time to talk to Scott and his folks. Okay, great. And then that time is limited and very valuable for both you and for the customer. So I think that planning and thinking it through and planning it well, I think that the assessor, the organization that just shows up and hopes that you're going to save them, is up for a rude awakening, because there's so much going on internal to the organization. A third party really can't provide that. Now, in my own practice with NIST Standard 171, I mean, we want to support our customers as much as possible, right? But at the end of the day, I'm teaching people how to fish. I'm not giving them fish. We don't have time to give to fish for them. So what we want them, or we don't have time to give them fish. We want them to fish on their own. So at the end of the day, it really is about maximizing the MSP training the OSC taking accountability, responsibility, and authority for their success, and then engaging their additional third-party providers, in a way that ensures success.
Okay, that's good. Jerry, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think Regan hit it right on the head there. A lot is going to go into audit prep and really understanding the CMMC or the DFARS rules and having interpretation of what is applicable to your organization, so you're investing in the right areas and not over-investing. So when that auditor comes, you've got all the evidence in place to hopefully rubber stamp and move through that process. So it's going to be very hard for an organization to try to do that on their own without help. So there's opportunities for the MSP to come in and help them with the audit prep, for example. Right? This is how it's going to go down, because they're doing it for lots of customers, right?
Yep.
Only happens once for that one DIB customer, but they're doing it lots. So they might be able to do audit prep services and pull all of that data together, plus pull in some other things, and then help even facilitate that. Mm-hmm. Or get another third-party advisor like yourself or myself that can do that and look, holistically as a trusted advisor. Those are really important, that these organizations don't have the skills. They're going to need help.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to find the right partners, as we say, across their own supply chains, that they feel comfortable enough to sit at the table with them to talk to that assessor.
I was just, you read my mind. What I was going to say is that the customer has to be willing to hear bad news from their MSP, right? Which is, look, we went through the assessment and things aren't going well, And that relationship, again, when we talk about conflict of interest, right? The IT guy who's internal to the organization, who may be doing other things, servicing the organization, that sort of thing, has to be willing to listen to the bad news, right? Which is, hey, look, we need to tighten up the ship here. These are things you want to work on. And it needs to be more of an open kimono sort of relationship and trust, right? Because I always tell the IT team, I'm not here we're not playing gotcha, right? I'm supposed to know more than you. So let's walk through this together, and let me help you walk through and get to success. Because at the end of the day, it's your job, and it's the company that's at risk, and I want you to succeed. But there has to be an open ear. I mean, a lot of IT folks are, and culturally speaking, are very have a very difficult time, hearing stuff that they don't want to listen to, or things that
Or change their ways, or
yeah.
go to their end users who are doing things that are out of compliance, that are affecting data access. They're giving away passwords. All that stuff has to be reinforced.
That's right.
We can tell them, but somebody's going to have to do that has the authority to manage that business.
That's right, and quite frankly, one of the things that I always recommend in every webcast that I'm asked about is that, in my humble opinion, as critical as an ITT team is to DFARS and CMMC compliance, they should not be leading the charge, because
not an IT function.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The data stakeholders. Because IT is hamstrung by what? By the people who manage the data in their workflow every single day. So we help in architecture and devices and management and policy and
IT
security.
does not own the data.
They do not own the data, and it always starts. I've been doing this for like 5 years now, and it always starts with the IT guy, because no one understands NIST 171. Right. But very, very quickly, the IT guy is hammered and hampered because of the fact that he doesn't own the data, or she doesn't own the data.
Yeah, what's really kind of key is, we've talked to a lot of customers, and talking to an IT person doesn't have the enterprise perspective, right?
That's right.
Usually there's a compliance officer or there's legal in-house counsel. They really understand the risk of the business. And if you look at job descriptions for them, or you look at what their responsibilities are, the key thing is to understand the standards of their business,
right,
and to enforce those.
Exactly.
So they're the ones that responsible to make sure that the company is adhering.
That's right.
To DFARS or CMMC, not just IT. A big part of it, but it's an enterprise discussion led by legal and compliance officers. They're the ones that's really accountable to the CEO, and the DoD will come to them.
Yeah, and I'm always an advocate for the IT team, because they are normally overtasked and undermanned, right? And so there's an opportunity there for them to get well, for legitimate advocacy to say, look, in order for the organization to be compliant, we really have to do these things that are critical, that are going to achieve critical mass in order for you to not just meet the requirements, but to sustain them. Yeah. And then those are when we can make some good decisions about whether or not we want to outsource products and services to a third party.
Well, what you said about IT being undermanned, under-resourced, that's very true. And I've read a number of statistics recently that says essentially, most DIB companies are spending in the 1% to 2% of revenue on IT, right? But if you compare that to regulated industries out there today, regulated industries on average spend somewhere between 6 and 8% of their revenue on IT. That's a major shift. It is. Because the DoD is essentially creating the largest regulated industry in the world right now. And so there's a shift in the spending and the resourcing that's going to have to take place inside the DIB to move from that 1% to 2% of spending to the 6 to 8% of your spending to get what you need to get to be able to pass these. So we're going kind of long, and I know that we need to wrap it up here soon. But I've got some more questions I really want to get in here. So last one before I want to transition, I want to talk a little bit about the interim rule. So you're in the process of training right now these assessors, right? Is there any conversation about how to assess for different types of organizations? MSSP, MSP as one potential type of organization that has very different threat angles and configuration needs than, say, a manufacturing organization that has a lot of manufacturing floor stuff with old out of support type systems, and how do you deal with that versus the standard defense contractor that's really putting bodies on site for a government agency. Right. Or is there any conversation about how you assess those types of organizations differently, or even infrastructure-wise, on-prem assessment versus cloud assessment? What can you say about that?
During the provisional period, we're doing sort of organic training, right, and organic content development, and right now we're focused primarily on the fundamentals, right, leveraging knowledge, skills, and abilities of really the premier. There's I believe between 300 and 500 persons that applied for the provisional program, and 70, 73 or 75 were selected. Now, we may end up expanding that, but especially with the interim rule being 60 days out. But the idea there is that there is going to be some specialization. And so in the Standards Industry Working Group, we have started working with partner organizations, major providers, to really look at that, because I think that it will be areas of specialization, because the requirements are so different, right? So when we look at cloud services, when we look at the MSP infrastructure, a data center infrastructure, we're really talking about something wildly different than going to a small, mid-sized, or even large manufacturing facility, right? So I think that you will see specialization, not during the provisional period. I think that the provisional period will reinforce what we already know, right? Which is assessors going into an environment and spending a lot of time and it not being really as efficient as we'd like for either party, right? Because now we're sort of breaking new ground. And the most important thing is the euphemism that just because I'm choosing an MSP or a cloud services provider doesn't mean they're compliant at all. I mean, as we've talked at length in other occasions, is that even if I'm FedRAMP High or FedRAMP Audit, I have to make sure that as an OSC or even as an assessor, make sure that the proper controls and configurations are put in place, or it really doesn't do us very good at all. So I think that underneath the provisional period, we are going to see some really hard lessons learned, but that's good. That's what it's for, right? Iterative learning, and to be able to reinforce and expand what we need to do as we go into after the provisional period and the fully operational.
Okay, great. So now I want to pivot a little bit to to talk a little about the interim rule. Interim rule has recently come out. There's been a lot of takes that have been posted out, LinkedIn and blogs and such about it. But I wanted to have a little bit of a dialogue about that as we wrap up today. There's a lot of information in the interim rule. Obviously, it was like 90 pages long, so there's a lot there. There was some really good things, I thought, and then there were some things that still leave a lot of questions to be asked and concerns. And so a couple of them that I wanted to bring up. Obviously, the DFARS 7012 rule still intact as it sits, so no changes to that. We're basically adding three new rules to it: 7019, 7020, and 21.
That's right.
So we've got three new rules that we've added into the DFARS. One of the biggest questions, and this has been a question since really CMMC was even started being talked about, was when are the people going to have to be certified by, right? And one of my concerns is in the document, it specifically said that you had to be certified by contract award date, right? And the concern that I have with that is what happens if you get to a point where all these companies have made proposals, there's been a winner awarded, and that winner is then notified, and they haven't got their certification, or the prime's got their certification, but 3 of their 5 subs have not gotten their certification. And what happens in that kind of situation? It seems like it's just rife with protest. I see protest after protest and lawsuits coming. In that kind of situation. Why? And I know you may not know the answer to this, so I'm asking for really opinion, I guess. Why not require that CMMC certification on proposal submission so that that whole team is good versus waiting till award when you have no idea if that team's going to be good?
Yeah, let's see. That's a really complicated question. So I think that, and this is again my opinion, I do not have inside knowledge on the rulemaking process. I think that there's a couple problematic things with the way that it's set up now, or underneath the interim rule, which is, how do I, as an assessor, assess an organization which actually may not have any COI in it at all? Mm-hmm. So how do you demonstrate the fact that you are compliant with, well, let's use the same practice, MP 3.122, which requires you to mark CUI. You don't have CUI.
You don't have any CUI. How
right.
do you know how to mark it?
Exactly.
You basically show that you're prepared to market, but
right.
you can't really show
I'm going to ask you, well, do you know how? Right? Well, yes, we've read, DODI 5248. Okay, great. whatever. I think that we've got some challenges, and it is the chicken and egg, right? We have to start someplace. So that's for sure. I think that when we look at the timing and sequence of events, what we really have to be focusing on is because there is supposed to be a sort of waterfall of implementation for the DoD for the interim rule. But the question really is will they follow that waterfall, right? Because I know that there are many organizations out there that are two instances I heard of from a contracting officer that they were writing their own rule, right? So the reality is as a contract clause. So the reality is that the real question is will they, the entirety of DoD actually follow the waterfall, right? So that you have time to implement, so that you have time to roll this out. Now, I think that there's an offset here, which is great, which is the DFARS 7012 self-attestation requirement, right? For documenting that, for self-assessing, documenting that, and then submitting that, right? So I think that the supplement to that rule is you're going to see that fatal funnel closing in on organizations out there that are sort of sitting as wallflowers at the dance, right? Because there is no time to wait. Because that once this rule rolls out, that self-attestation piece will be effective immediately. So the DoD has assumed that because you've self-attested that you've been compliant for the past 3 years, right? So what happens when your self-attestation, when you actually documented that, actually is different from what you've communicated over the last 3 years, either as a subcontractor or as a prime contractor. So I think that very quickly, there is an urgent, red star cluster going up, which says folks need to get compliant right now. If they don't see that freight train is headed down the tracks at them and is almost right on top of them. When we look at the implementation of the DFARS of the new CMMC rule, there's definitely going to be challenges there. And if we look at the timing sequence, it's definitely going to be challenging, at the point of award, or even pre-award, because you're gearing up, and that sort of competitive advantage. Now, if I'm DFARS 7012 and I'm actually compliant because I've self-attested that I'm compliant, it may default to that. I really don't know. It's going to be challenging, though. It's going to be challenging for what happens if I've actually talked to DAU about this, which are great people out there. Chris Newborn is leading the charge, where a contractor has a showcase network that they don't really intend to use at all for CMMC. It's pre-award, so you don't really know. And then they get that certified because it's pristine, brand spanking new, right? No problems, easy. Assessor rolls in. Yeah, wow, that's amazing. You're going to use this for the contract? Sure, certified, done. Walks out the front door, and then they don't use that. They don't use the pristine, network at all, right? So there are going to be challenges there, and I've advocated with Chris that a contracting officer at any time should have the right to be able to for a reinspection or recertification, right? So if this certificate, for example, the OSC has grown, we started out, and at the time of award, it was $2 million and 100 person, and then it went to very quickly was expanded to 500 people. Totally different animal in a small mid-sized business to be able to manage that in an IT and infrastructure environment. So at some point in time, the company may well outpace what under the terms of the certification of the environment that it was certified, and really outpace that entirely. So right. Going back and relooking that. So okay. I think that we definitely have some challenges here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. One other thing that wasn't addressed in the interim rule was really CUI, marking and identification.
Right.
One of the big challenges that contractors have had really since the beginning of DFARS, right. 7012, is that content is not coming to them marked from the government,
That's right.
And so that still has not been addressed through this interim rule.
Yep.
Do you see anything happening, with that and how that's going to get addressed?
Yeah, so a couple things. So if you look underneath DODI 5248, and we actually talked about this today, so it's fresh on the mind. In the paragraph 1.1, or 1.4, anyway, then in the very first, the very first scoping of the policy, which is like the first 4 sentences in the entire policy of DOD 5248, it says that this is applicable to all DOD agencies and those covered underneath DFARS 708 and 7012, right? So what we're going to see is, I'm certain, is an adaptation of that current existing marking policy and CUI policy over to the CMC rule. There's no doubt there. However, though, there is a challenge in that I've been doing this, Jerry can probably attest this too. I've been doing this for 5 years now. I've never once seen a document properly marked, right? Never once. Now, I've seen an ITAR document properly marked, but I haven't seen a CUI document properly marked, right? So the challenge is this, and this is DAU's taking this head on, is educating the contracting officers to really understanding what the requirements are and making sure that both the OFC and the DoD program manager are educated to what those requirements are. Because underneath 32 CFR Part 202.16, it says if it's unmarked and meets the definitions of CUI, it is CUI, period. And yet it has to be safeguarded and handled appropriately. And the DODI 5248 says that if I create CUI as an OSC, then I'm responsible for marking it at the time of creation, right? So when we start there, we have to educate the DIB about what those current requirements are as we speak right now. The second piece is that the DoD FAR rule is coming. And it is coming like a freight train as well. I expect that to arrive like in December sometime for public comment. Now that is a very, very thorough, absolutely unambiguous, as I understand the rule, criteria for identifying CUI, and making sure CUI is properly marked from the government, what types of CUI are involved in the contract, all the way down, that those are all prerequisites for developing and issuing the contract. So those won't be check the box. It's going to be a very thorough process that the government's going to have to go through in order to identify what CUI, what categories of CUI, how it's to be marked and handled, and so on and so forth, any special handling requirements. So I'm hopeful that will reduce the ambiguity out there for the OSCs. At the end of the day, though, I'm accountable for my own actions as a company out in the DIB. When I take the responsibility of accepting the contract award, or the subcontract purchase order. So I have to educate myself and understand what the requirements are right now, and then very quickly, I think that the NARA has done a very good job in developing the DFAR or the CUI rule for the FAR. Mm-hmm. So that means every single federal government agency that has CUI will be encompassed within the FAR rule. So think about that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that gets us. We haven't even talked about where the CMMC and everything with CUI may be going down the road with the rest of the government or even international.
Right.
There's so much more that we could dive into there, but unfortunately, we're about out of time. It sounds like we have a lot of freight trains coming our way still. I don't know how many more freight trains we can handle, but this has been a pretty big one for us to deal with.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Regan and Jerry. I really appreciate you guys coming on and working through this stuff with us. I know that everybody watching today, really appreciates your insights and the information that you've been able to give. So again, thank you very much. And